Just need a legal size pad. I'm not seeing, we don't prepare agenda, we don't. prepare
Well, the
agendas
schedule,
for-
the flow of the.
I've not seen a schedule.
Just didn't look hard enough. So did you guys have that yet either? Still,
No.
Everybody needs
I asked you
one.
guys tonight, I said, oh, well.
You're welcome, sir. Once you missed it.
I'm gonna leave this off until we get the presenters here.
Okay. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome, sir.
Mr. Jesse, did you need a legal pad?
No, I don't.
Anybody else need a legal pad?
We got a few to spare.
Great, thanks.
You want one too?
Yeah, if you don't care, please.
Jeff, I know you want one, don't you?
Sure.
The flow of the meeting there. One extreme or the other. I still almost gonna give myself one. Snapshot everybody likes to see. You're welcome.
Good.
Anybody else?
You're welcome.
You're gonna show some ups and downs, aren't you?
I'm gonna sit right here. I just don't want it to create a danger with my cord.
I think it's the last one I got for you this morning.
You fellas need a pad, a legal pad.
Watch the.
You're welcome.
Larry, Curly, and Mo.
Sherman. I'm Sherman.
Morning, right.
Oh, Eric.
Hello.
Did you figure out what you want to correct truck is? I figured you'd have me a price today.
I'm afraid to price it.
That's exactly right.
You want me to take it down just 1 degree?
I don't know, because as it gets hotter out, do you think? It is a little chilly right now.
Hello, Mr. Soldier, I'm gonna sit beside of you.
Well, have a seat.
Make sure nobody trips over my
Well,
chair.
this will be shut, nobody will be traveling back and forth through here.
I'm not broke down, I wasn't sure.
I can't make it all day
I'm gonna
without
go
a
ahead and hit record, cause
battery.
I think it's close.
Saw a Thacker Farm truck come down Stanley Valley. Charlie
We're
Thacker.
recording, okay?
You're live, all right, good deal.
We're recording, guys.
Yeah, I'm ready if y'all are.
Okay, I'll go ahead and call this, budget hearing order, it's 8:31, so. Yep, can you do roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Roll call. Larry Clontz,
Here.
Mike Correll,
Present.
Raymond Jesse. Here. Jeff Barrett. Here. Jason Roach.
Present.
Charlie Thacker.
Here.
Hannah Wyman.
Here.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have, 7 members present for a quorum. And with your permission, I'll go ahead and call the roll for the other commissioners that's present. Looks like we have Danny Alves. Here. Mr. Chairman, I believe that's all the commissioners that we have that are present at this time.
Go ahead and let Eric do budget review.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to budget hearings. Thank everybody for being here this morning. Thank our guests for being here this morning. Everybody, 21-22 budget hearings. For those of you who've not done a hearing before, we'll start with the budget review, and then we'll have all the officers come, office holders and department heads come in and present their budgets. Time to ask questions and to listen to the concerns, and then generally we meet again afterwards and then make decisions. That date has not been set yet, but after the last day of hearings, we'll set that date for when we come back and make motions for calculation purposes for the second draft. Everybody's got their budget document notebook. We'll flip that open. That very first page you'll come to, that is from the property assessor's office, and that is how this office composes the value of a penny. Have to work with the assessments there from real property, tangible personal property. Bring that together with the public utilities, and that's how we get our value of a penny. The next document in there, past that public utilities page, is our CTAS salary schedule for our elected officials. Those are all mandated by TCA is a minimum. If you'll flip to the second page, you'll see some handwritten calculations there. Because of the sheriff's salary supplement, it then pushes the mayor's salary. So you'll see the sheriff's on there with his supplement, and then the mayor has to be 5% in front of the sheriff. Everybody else's is exactly, well, including theirs, is exactly the same as it was last year. Those officials did not get a raise this year. And then the very last page in that first section is a document from the Administration Office of the Courts, and the judges did get a raise, 1.2%. So that was put onto our general sessions judge salary, and then of course that drives our juvenile judge's salary at 40% of that. So we'll flip over to that first tab, general fund budget document. If you'll flip over to the blue pages, those are our notes here on the general fund. Tax rate and assessment on which to base the property tax collections. This budget is based on the current information received from the property assessor's office, with the total assessment being $1,332,642,047. The assessment has been reduced $300,000 to allow for any farther appeals or other changes. Because of the nature of us getting this started and them not being done, we just use that as a blanket amount to reduce for pending appeals that may not go our way. So 1 penny, 100% this year is $133,000, but we don't actually ever use 100%. We use a 93% collection rate, and so at 93%, you're looking at $123,907.81 per penny. And all budgets are always based on a 93% collection rate. Just for frame of reference, last year's budgeted assessment was $1,117,514,313. The 2021 assessment summary from the property assessor's office is included in your budget information at the beginning of the notebook. We just glanced over that. Go ahead and touch base on this real quick right now. It's kind of a strange year. Typically, every 5 years we have the reappraisal. So normally we have a set property tax rate, and we're just looking at how that hits the budget and seeing if we need to adjust anything. This year, because of that process not being concluded yet, we're dealing with an estimated tax rate. So once they finish their process, we'll have a new certified tax rate. But right now, what I have in here is an estimate. So what I've done with that estimate is I figured out which fund had what percentage based on the prior year's certified tax rate and kept that same allocation for the new year. So everybody's will look less because the assessed value went up, but what it is the exact same percentage they had last year. So although you'll see every fund has less pennies, it comes out to the same percentage-wise. So I didn't just rearrange the pennies, I've just tried to keep them the same on a different tax rate. Revenue, current property tax, account 40110 on page 1. The estimate for current property tax is based on the estimated property tax of 2.1573. That's what I was referring to right there. Of which 77.66 cents is allocated for this fund. Due to the appraisal for this year, we do not yet know the certified tax rate, and once that is set, the estimate could change. Through the month of March, we have collected 101.7% of the budgeted property tax collections for 2020-2021. Therefore, even for collections for April through June, we have exceeded our estimate projections. The rate for budgeted property tax collections for 1920 year end at March was 101.9. Prior year collections for penalties and interest, revenue collected in these accounts will be approximately $15,600 more than what was budgeted. Pickup taxes, the estimated revenue for 2021 is above budget. In prior years, we have had pickup taxes for Baldor and Samdong. It appears that there will be an increased amount above budget estimates this year. However, it is declining, so the projection has been reduced for next year to maintain a conservative estimate there. Wheel tax, the estimated revenue for 2021 is slightly above budgeted. Estimated collections have been listed separately on the budget document so that commissioners can see what the original wheel tax amount is collecting, as well as the additional $30 and $10 collections. This is what allowed the general fund to be balanced for the 17-18 budget year per orders from the State Comptroller's Office. The $10 fee is also able and eligible to fund other public safety expenditures, including volunteer fire departments, rescue squads, Hawkins County Emergency Response Team, ambulance service, American Red Cross, and the Hawkins County Humane Society contributions. Any consideration of a special funding request from these agencies and or public safety departments would be funded from the undesignated amount in the reserve if available. Based on our revenue and expenditure projections, there could be a reserve for public safety of possibly $80,000 on 6/30/21. Other taxes, fines, and fees. These revenues have been based on the actual amounts posted through March 21, plus estimates for the remainder of the year. The collection estimates for several of the revenue accounts fiscal year do not appear to be meeting the budgeted amounts, thus we've lowered estimates for several of the revenue line items in order to not overestimate revenues. Most of those taxes right there and fees are based on the court system, and thanks to the pandemic, a lot of those are just not tracking very well. So I hope they bounce back, and they most likely will once the courts open back up full steam. But until that happens, we've maintained some conservative estimates on what to expect for next year. Litigation tax. It appears it will collect about $18,000 less than the amount collected in 1920 and should collect less than the amount budgeted. Thus, we are decreasing this estimate revenue for 21-22. Same exact story there. This one here is problematic. Contracted prisoner board. Hawkins County receives this revenue for housing state inmates. Total collections through the February board bill payments are about $80,000 less than this last year. The estimated collections for this revenue in the first draft aren't on track to exceed the budgeted amount of $950,000, and the estimate for next year has been decreased by $750,000, $750,000. In the last 2 years, the board bill budgeted amount has been reduced by roughly $1 million. This is a direct result of the pandemic and the effect it's had on the court system and the state prison system. Currently, the state has a surplus of beds when in years past it has always had a shortage. Hopefully this revenue will rebound, but until this starts to happen, we have greatly reduced this projection for the 21-22 budget year. Just for frame of reference, back in 17-18, the board bill was bringing in about $1.6 million. So that one has hurt our budget considerably. I know I was talking to Tony and Butch the other day, and they said the state has had a surplus now for quite a while, and they've been asking for inmates back, and they've been kind of trying to delay that process. And so their tune changed, and instead of asking for inmates, they sent them a list and said have them ready. So again, as the courts open back up, I hope that turns around, but as of right now, we're kind of in panic mode on this revenue. Many of the revenue accounts posting run a month behind, so for the first draft, actual revenue figures are being estimated for at least 3 months, if not 4. By the end of the fiscal year, when actual revenues are posted, total revenue will change, hopefully with a positive result instead of negative. Switching over to the expenditure side, salaries. The elected officials will not receive a raise for the 21-22 fiscal year, according to the county official salary schedule publication from CTAS. A copy is included with your budget information at the beginning of your notebook behind the assessment information. Step raises are included for all general fund employees. A COLA will be worked up if the commission desires to have one done, but it was mentioned in prior workshops and/or hearings that this may not be feasible until the 3-year implementation of the new salary scale is fully implemented. Excuse me. Medical insurance. Estimates for the 21-22 fiscal year include an 8% rate increase. We have left our employee-employer split the same for the first draft at 30/70. It will likely be August before we know what the insurance will be. Since the plan year is November 1 through October 31st, we have calculated an 8% increase for 8 months and kept the previous 4 months at the same rate. The total cost of medical insurance has increased since changing this plan due to more employees picking up the insurance as well as adding additional independents. The Sheriff's Department and jail budgets are usually estimated to include extra policies to be available should there be a need for a new or current employee to participate in our medical insurance plan. Additional policy premiums have also been included in account 58600-207, from which retirees' medical insurance premiums are paid. Funds should be available if the employee must pick up insurance in the middle of the year, resulting in the need to transfer appropriation from 58600 account to the appropriate office or department. All that's saying is, people have qualifying circumstances come up throughout the year or open enrollment. And so insurance is always a moving target, so we have a reserve set up there so we don't hopefully have to hit fund balance every time something changes on the insurance. The county allows a retiree hired prior to November 1, 2017 to continue in the medical insurance plan until he or she reaches age 65 or becomes Medicare eligible. The county continues to pay its portion of a retiree's premium until that time. If the retiree has a dependent and wishes to continue coverage on the dependent until he or she reaches age 65, the county pays no portion of that premium. Additional changes may be made to medical insurance estimates before the final budget draft if there are personnel changes or coverage changes that we're aware of before June 30th. Employer contribution rate for retirement. The current employer contribution rate is 5.68%, with Hawkins County electing to pay 7% for Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System through June 30th of 2020. Actuarial studies are now performed every year to determine the employer amount. We have received a rate calculation that will be in effect for July 1 of 2021. Our rate stayed at the 5.68% with encouragement to pay at a higher rate. We have budgeted our new rate at 7% for 21-22 budget. This will help offset any future rate increases. We did that a couple months ago, or maybe 1 month ago at our last budget meeting. That was imperative. I was really happy that we were able to keep that at 7% because TCRS is evaluating their one of their assumptions that they use, which is their investment rate of return, and they're thinking of reducing that. So if they reduce that, it'll be very, very good that we're overpaying to help offset any future changes in our rate. It'll help stabilize that for us. Hawkins County is a contributory participant in Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. This means that employees contribute 5% of their salary, with the county paying the employer's share. Some counties and entities are non-contributory, meaning that the agency pays the employees 5% as well as the employer's share. TCRS benefits are not based on the amount paid in for each employee, but rather on their highest consecutive 5 years of salary and the number of years of service credit. Contribution to area agencies. Contributions have been included for budget calculations in the 21-22 fiscal year at the same level as was budgeted as 2021 for all agencies, except a few that we have contracts with. Listing and documentation for area agencies will be included in your contribution request notebook. Now, several of the other ones have asked for additional money, but until that's approved, they're just in the budget at the same level as last year. Contracts with government and public agencies. Most contracts with government and public agencies such as First Tennessee Development District, First Tennessee Human Resource Agency, etc. have been budgeted at the same level. Now, First Tennessee Development District's in there twice. One's at the same level, one had a modest increase, which we'll talk about later. The budget amount for the Johnson City Forensic Center has been included. Hawkins County's share of $119,669. However, there is no new contract at this time, so that could change in the coming months when we see a new contract. Haven't been able to see if there's a rate increase planned from them or not. We have included an increased appropriation of $15,510 for the planning contract with First Tennessee Development District, and that's an increase of $1,410 over last year. I believe they had held that rate for about 6 years, if I remember correctly, so that's their first rate increase in quite a while. Children's Comprehensive Services, the Juvenile Detention Center, budget amount has been increased $2,500 to $170. That's one of those ones that we don't really have much control over. It just depends on how many that Judge Boyd has to send, and we just have to cover the bill. So just based off of the numbers, even though the court system slowed down, it didn't appear that that part of it did. And so just put a little increase in there to make sure we have enough to cover it. Other budget increases. The increases for computer maintenance contracts and other necessary expenditures to operate efficiently have been included in this first draft. Some requests above the previous year's budget have not been included and will not be until approved. See the additional request worksheet included in your budget information. That's the green sheet there that I just handed out to you this morning. Reminder, there's a maintenance of effort requirement for the Sheriff's Department, Election Commission, and Library. Also, the Property Assessor's Office has a maintenance of effort as well. The amount budgeted for the workers' compensation insurance may change once we finalize our insurance quotes. Due to the excessive workers' compensation claims that we had in years past, we started paying a $1,000 deductible for each workers' comp claim in the 13-14 fiscal year. However, our losses have definitely improved over the last few years, and we're trending well for this fiscal year. Thus, we were able to remove the $1,000 deductible in 16-17 moving forward. We also have the drug-free workplace program in effect and receiving 5% credit, which is divided amongst the general solid waste and highway funds. In addition, we receive a safety designee credit of 1% that is divided amongst the general solid waste and highway funds. June 30th, 22 unassigned fund balance. This first draft of the general fund budget shows an estimated unassigned fund balance of $7,059,887 at the end of 21-22 fiscal year. After June 30th of 2020, this figure will change because the first draft usually will have expenditures slightly overestimated and the revenues underestimated. Actual expenditures in the Sheriff's Department and jail and actual revenues for the state board bill will be a major determining factor on the changes in fund balance. The last several years, we have not had to do a tax anticipation note for general fund to operate until property taxes were collected. This should be true again this year due to our strong fund balance. CTAS recommends the general fund unassigned fund balance should be at least 18 to 20% of total budgeted expenditures. The estimated unassigned fund balance for 21-22 is at 36.92% right now of the total estimated expenditures and other uses. It is necessary to maintain a good fund balance to continue to obtain the bond ratings that we have now. A rating of AA3 was assigned on the March 21 bond issue. The financial health of Hawkins County will continue to be monitored by those in the bond and investment market. Also, a good fund balance is needed when you have to make grant expenditures before filing for reimbursements. Our bond rating was teeter-tottering this last time on being increased even more. So we're right there on the cusp of having even a better bond rating. So I'd like to see that keep going that direction. Future budget changes. In future budget drafts, some expenditures funded by grants or insurance recovery funds may be switched from 2021 to 21-22 if the project is not completed or underway before June 30th of 21. This will not change the estimated fund balance for June 30th of 2022. It'll just make one year look a little better, one year look a little worse. And that is our notes on the general fund. Does anybody have any questions on that before we move to solid waste?
On that juvenile detention center,
Yes.
I mean, it's increasing from 25 to 170,000.
No, the increase is 2,500. Excuse me. It's already at 167,500. That's just the amount of the increase.
You just added 2,500 more.
Yes, sir. Yep.
I just
Sorry about
wasn't
that.
sure. I
Didn't mean
seen-
to alarm you. Just going up 2,500.
Okay.
Juveniles haven't got that bad.
I was thinking, man.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, this is gonna be a silly question, but I'm gonna ask you what I understand.
That's fine.
So, last year's budgeted assessment was $1,117 million. When you say budgeted assessment, is that budgeted like what we received in funds, or is that our bottom dollar that we have? I don't.
Neither. What that actually is, what that represents, is the value of the assessed property. So
Okay.
not tax revenue coming
So
in.
it's not real money.
Well, no, it's the basis for where real money starts from. But no, it's the value of all the property in Hawkins County before the different tax rates are applied to it on what we actually collect. But that's just the value of everything.
Okay.
And so normally it doesn't increase that much, but due to the reappraisal is why we've had a more significant jump than in previous budget years.
Okay. So my next question, going back to the unassigned fund balance, you made a statement that we're teeter-tottering on making the next step to a better bond rating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if our actual unassigned fund balance is at 36.92, where does that have to be? What's the lowest percentage that it has to be to get us to that next level of bond rating?
There are several factors that they use to determine our bond rating, and our fund balance is only one of them. They're pretty pleased with where we have it. I don't know that our fund balance will, going up a few more percentage would have a very significant effect on that. There's some things that are outside of our control. The wealth indices of Hawkins County are just not strong nationwide. Of course, our cost of living is down, so it balances out. But when they look at things like that, that's outside of our control. One of the bigger things that they also look at is our debt that we're carrying, per capita. And so as we continue to pay our debt down, that'll probably be the biggest driver for our next bond rating increase.
So you said that going up probably wouldn't help us too much,
But going down,
would hurt us.
exactly, yes. By going up a little bit more, we probably won't see a significant change. But if we go down, in years past, traditionally what we do is we raise taxes at some point and we get ahead of things. Our fund balances go up, we kind of flatline, and then we start balancing budgets out of fund balance, and it starts decreasing. And then at that point is when you start running the risk of this bond rating dropping. When our fund balance starts to decrease year after year, they start to panic and wonder, when are we going to do something about it? And so these people who watch those markets, they don't like seeing those fund balances decrease. They don't mind them so much to flatline, but they don't like seeing them go in the other direction. When you start balancing budgets continually out of fund balance, and not only on paper at the beginning of the year, but when it actually finishes that way, they don't like seeing that.
So we budget based on an estimate of a 93% collection rate from our property taxes, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Historically, how much in advance of 93% do we collect?
You have to ask Mr. Shanks to know how current, but 96, 97, I mean, it's usually a pretty good cushion, and that's I highly recommend leaving it that way. I don't really advise anybody to start using a 94 or 95% collection rate. There was some concern, especially with this year with the pandemic, that rate may be down. But last time I talked to Mr. Shanks, he said we were basically right on par with where we were at last year at this time. That's probably about a month or two old now, but he wasn't concerned at that time.
The last time I spoke with Jim, he said this year looked better than any of the previous years. He said, a lot of taxpayers have taken the stimulus check and paid their property tax and got caught up. He said, we're really looking good on this, on that end of it.
Outstanding.
Eric, help me understand this. Now, last year, our budget was, set on $253 for $100 assessed value, correct?
2.5323, but yes.
Okay, and this year you got it at 215?
2.1573, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Flip back to that page.
Yeah, it's on the first page. Okay, at 253 last year, what was the total amount brought in? If, I don't know where I saw it out there.
And that's on page 1. And it's still an estimate at this point, but 9.7, roughly.
At 253.
Mm-hmm.
And what will the 215 bring in?
We're estimating 9.6.
Keep in mind, 215 is just a.
Just, absolutely.
Right.
That is not set in stone at all. That is actually something I had to reach out to the assessor's office, and they reached out to whoever it is their support is to get me that estimate so that we could proceed with the budget. If I would have left it at the 2.5323, we would be overestimating our revenue significantly.
Yes.
And so we had to have a baseline to get this process started. And so that's the most realistic number I could have at this time. As soon as the certified tax rate is set, we will then adjust accordingly.
You're just saying that that's the projected percentage. You don't really know right now because of, the reassessment that's took place,
Yes.
but, if it was 253, then after the assessment takes place, then that rate changes. We lower it to bring in the same amount of money it did last year, pretty much, close as we can.
Correct. The county cannot receive a financial windfall from the reassessment. But if I would have left the old tax rate in here, this budget would look great until the certified tax rate came, and then everybody would be upset. So we're just trying to get ahead of that and be as close to reality as we can. This is my first reappraisal year, so I don't have any historical data to how close the certified tax rate comes into that estimate, but I'm hoping the folks that provided that are pretty good at it. So it's the best number we have to work with right now.
I did a little math on my taxes last year, 253, and I kept dropping it until I got it down to the same amount that I paid last year. Mine was 211 on the new assessed value.
I did the same, and mine was even less. And so when I say the county can't receive a financial windfall, and they need to receive the same money as they did last year, there's two other things you need to think about in there. One, there is some growth, and so that's a factor. But also, the individual person could very well receive an increase in taxes or a decrease in taxes, but the county as a whole can't. So some people are going to be all over that spectrum, but the average, they'll find out what that is and bring us back in at the same level as last year. But the individual taxpayer very well could see increases or decreases depending on their assessment.
But I agree, that's why the only thing I had to go on was my own. Mine was 211, that would put me where I paid the same as I did last year.
I think mine was 191, so I didn't figure that would actually happen.
Eric, do you have any idea what the collection rate is for surrounding counties, by chance?
I do not. If no other questions on the general fund, I'll move along to solid waste. All right. With the 2010-11 fiscal year budget, the county mandates change that required solid waste fund to be funded by designated revenues instead of a transfer from general fund that had been passed, made up of a major portion of revenue for solid waste sanitation operations. The The revenue line items that were moved from general fund to solid waste are local option sales tax, business tax, cable TV franchise tax, or fees, excuse me, and alcohol beverage tax. These particular revenues were chosen simply because the total of their anticipated revenues, together with the usual revenues of waste tire disposal, sale of recycled materials, and solid waste grants, gave us the total needed to fund anticipated expenditures. Additional revenues may need to be moved from the general fund to solid waste in the future. Currently, though, that doesn't seem to be the case. Revenues, sales tax collections. We are estimating total collections to be $400,000 more than budgeted. Through March postings, we had received 110.1% of budgeted collections and $191,000 more than this time last year. This revenue was under projected at the advice and Tennessee Comptroller last year due to the pandemic. We reduced it last year by $25,000, even though it came in over budgeted. This year, we will increase the budgeted amount by $200,000 in a conservative effort to get more in line with the actual revenue. So, as I stated there, this was one last year that looked fine, but everybody was panicking and not exactly sure how the pandemic was going to affect different revenues, and this is one that they felt was going to be particularly vulnerable to the pandemic. And I suppose in other counties, larger counties that had more of a inflow of traffic for their sales, they did see a negative effect. But us being a smaller rural county, that mixed with the changing laws on internet sales, our sales tax has been just fine. It's been rather strong. So after now being conservative and seeing that and coming up way over budgeted, we are going to adjust it. But when revenues come in over budgeted, generally we don't want to jump right up to last year's level. We don't know that we'll maintain that. So we're a little slow to move them up and fast to move them down if they don't make it. It just follows our conservative principles. Business tax. Total collections for business tax could be $30,000 less than budgeted. Through March, we're about $2,000 more than at this time last year, and at 26.3% of collections. We're reducing budget collections by $10,000. Cable TV franchise license. Total collections are up slightly with the amount budgeted. We have received roughly $30,000 more than this time last year. We are keeping this estimate revenue at the same amount at this time. As more actuals come in, this may get increased. And that one only comes in quarterly, it's a little behind, so that one's a little slow to really show up. Sale of recycled materials, total collections have been estimated at roughly $24,000 more than budgeted amount, thus we're increasing this budgeted revenue to $70,000 for this fiscal year. Solid waste grants, $22,000 has been budgeted for a state waste tire grant based on current collections. This is being kept the same budgeted revenue from the prior year. Alcohol beverage tax, total collections should be about $15,000 greater than the budgeted amount. We're at 90.6% of estimated revenues, thus increasing this budgeted revenue about $10,000. Pandemic, I think, had a reverse effect on that tax, which is fine. Sale of equipment. There was one sale of equipment during the 2021 fiscal year. The surplus trash trucks were sold with proceeds used to buy new trash trucks. The proceeds from the sale did not equal the cost of the new trucks. Thus, the reserve from prior year's sale of surplus trucks was used to bridge the difference. The reserve should support a couple of additional years before the difference will need to be added to the budget. I know some of you may be very familiar with this, but some of you may not be. In the years past, in the solid waste department, the maintenance to keep the trucks running was getting very high. And so a different approach was decided. There would be a sale, and we would be on a rotation schedule for trash trucks. When we initially started that, we had a surplus of trash trucks. And so we sold, I can't remember at this point, but several, 9, 10, 11 trucks just to buy 2. And so a reserve was established for future years. And that's what I'm talking about here. We hit that reserve, but that reserve is still at a level that if sales continue to go as well as they have at auction, it should probably support it for an additional 2 sales, maybe partially a third. But at some point, a budgeted difference will have to be included in this amount to continue to stay on that 2-year rotation. But in theory, that amount needed to bridge the difference would hopefully be less than the amount we were spending on maintenance to keep those old trucks operating. So just a little backstory on why that is what it is. Expenditures. Salaries have been figured with the appropriate step increases in compliance with the 3-year implementation for those who were hired before the new salary scale went into effect. We will calculate COLAs if the committee directs us to prepare those calculations, but again, it was discussed that it probably wouldn't be feasible until the 3 implementation is completely done. Some of the salaries in the past in solid waste were a mixture of full-time and part-time employees. From the 1920 fiscal year on, we have separated those into 2 different line items for the benefit of the solid waste director as well as the accounting department as a whole. Same 8% increase included for health insurance from November through June. likely be August before we know the actual insurance rate. Hopefully it's less than 8%, but I think last year, if I remember correctly, it was about 5.9. The estimated amounts for workers' compensation insurance may change when we receive our final insurance quotes. However, it appears that they are sufficiently budgeted for workers' compensation in all categories, so the appropriate amounts should not change or shouldn't change significantly if they do. All budgets in solid waste saw a reduction in state retirement due to the new TCRS rate of 7% in the 1920 fiscal year, down from 8.68 in the 1819. The same rates of 7% have been applied to the 2021 and will be to the future 21-22 budget year. Sanitation management, we have increased trustees commission $2,000 due to the increase in revenues. With that sales tax coming in, trustees commission goes up, so anytime your revenues go up, your trustees commission has to go up as well to follow suit. Waste pickup. There's a part-time personnel line item in the budget. However, we've not been able to keep a part-time driver employed, so in the 13-14 budget, we increased the overtime line item and decreased part-time and continued this through current 21-22 budget. But if we can ever decide to go the other way and keep a part-time driver employed, we can do a budget amendment to move the funds back out of overtime into part-time. Convenience centers, this budget's relatively unchanged other than salary and salary-related line items. Other waste collection is no longer in use. We got rid of that in the 18-19 fiscal year budget and moved all that into the recycling center budget. Recycling center, as of the 19-20 fiscal year, budget of recycling center salaries are not broken down into full-time and part-time employees, are now broken down. This budget has a reduction, even with salaries increasing for the 21-22 fiscal year. So due to attrition, some of the new people were cheaper than the people who had left, so those salaries are actually down this year. Landfill operation and maintenance, this one hurt a little bit. The contract with BFI has been budgeted with a 13.7% increase from the 2021 fiscal year. I guess, I don't know, possibly with the pandemic, a lot of people were at home doing some cleaning projects and the amount of trash taken off increased significantly, but pretty large increase there from one year to the next. Other waste disposal, this functions for the waste tire disposal and is funded mostly by tipping fees and a state grant. Interest on notes, this line item is budgeted in case there is a need to do a tax anticipation note to be able to operate until revenues are received. We've not had to do that and don't anticipate doing it this year as well. Bottom line for solid waste, it appears that the revenues budgeted will support expenditures for this fund with no new revenue needed. However, in future, additional revenue may need to be added. The estimated ending unassigned fund balance for 21-22 is $1.7 million in that fund. Any questions on solid waste?
That BFI, is anybody working on that contract or anything? I mean, that thing is shot up every year.
It has, and if anybody has any ability to bargain with them, control them, reason with them, I mean, I'd be more than happy for anybody to bite that off. But no, as far as I'm aware of, nobody is currently engaged in any talks with them to reduce that. But I agree, that's a large increase in a single year.
So they just increase and hand it to us and that's it? There's no negotiation?
No, there's not.
Contract, Rick, that,
All right, in accordance with the Hawkins County disposal contract dated December 18, 1990, paragraphs 4 and 6, BFI Waste System of Tennessee LLC respectively request following rate adjustment for the disposal of the county's municipal solid waste. And what they do is they base it off an amount that comes in there per ton. And they're saying that our tonnages went up that much that justifies that increase. Be more than happy to let anybody have a copy of this contract and review it. And like I said, if anybody thinks they have any pull or ability to reason with them to knock it down, it'd be wonderful. It'd be nothing but beneficial to the county. But yeah, I've got the letter of the rate increase here. If anybody wants a copy of that during a break, I'd be more than happy to run you off a copy of it.
Yeah, I might take a copy of it.
Okay. Two? All right.
Yeah, I will too, Barry.
Sounds great. Copies all around.
Before we get going forward, I'd like to, Jim, Commissioner Parker.
I did.
Okay.
She came in, I have her 8:40.
All right, just make sure we don't want to make it mad.
I looked up and it was like 8:40, and I figured that was close, Nancy.
All right, here are no other questions on solid waste. The next tab in your budget book is the drug fund. We don't generally do any notes on that. If you have any questions on that one, just direct those to either Sheriff Lawson or Chief Deputy Allen when they present at their time. Just a quick comment on it, he did greatly reduce the expenditure side of that budget for next year, which I think will really help to keep that fund solid for several years. Pleased to see that. The next tab is the Highway Department. On this one, I'll discuss the revenues, but the same thing, any questions on the expenditures, we just defer to Mr. Bean when he presents his budget as the road superintendent. Estimated current property taxes based on the current rate of 2.1573, of which 11.82%, 82 cents is allocated for this fund. Assessment is based on the most recent information from the Property Assessor's Office. As we discussed earlier, there's the value. We do it the 93% collection with $123,907.81 for the penny. Property taxes is currently estimated to finish $62,437 above the 2021 fiscal year amount. The net total of local taxes collected appears to be more than what was budgeted by $80,106. Overall revenues are fairly consistent with the amounts budgeted. Gasoline tax could be approximately $115,000 more than what was budgeted. This was one of the revenues that we were also advised to keep our estimates conservative due to the pandemic. We will increase this projection only slightly for next year to remain conservative, although the pandemic has seemed to have little to no effect on this revenue. This was the other big one with sales tax that they cautioned us to really watch. We didn't reduce it last year, but we did hold a line on it, even though it was coming in so strong and looked like we should have increased it, we didn't. But again, it came in over budgeted, and so gas tax has not been hit particularly hard here, at least in this county. Any questions about the highway fund? Hearing none, move along to debt service. Now your debt service tab has all three debt services in here, so it's tried to be separated by a green page every page breaks, but the first one we're going to go over is your general debt service fund. And that should be the first blue notes you come to in that tab. Revenue, 40110 property tax. The estimate for current property tax for 21-22 is based on the proposed certified property tax rate of 2.1573, of which 4.26 cents is allocated for this fund and uses a 93% collection rate of our penny at $123,000. The 18-19 fiscal year tax rate of this fund was decreased to 1 cent, with the remaining usual 7 cents being allocated to the General Capital Projects Fund. This allowed for proposed capital projects to be funded at the same amount as the refund to General Debt Service Fund for repayment of the spec building in the Phipps Bend Industrial Park. Hawkins County was refunded by the Industrial Commission the principal and interest that had been paid to build the spec building in the amount of $721,248. The tax rate for the 19-20 fiscal year was budgeted at 5 cents, which included returning 4 cents from the General Capital Projects tax rate. The remaining usual 3 cents was left as a portion of the tax rate in General Capital Project Fund to fund the jail sewer grinder project and future projects that would come up. The tax rate for 2021 was budgeted at the same 5 cents as was 19-20. Account 40266 litigation tax for jail courthouse. These litigation taxes and general debt service fund are used to retire debt for the Justice Center and the courthouse renovation project. This year's estimate collections are down by $21,000 from last year, and the budget amount for 21-22 has been decreased accordingly. Account 44110, this is another one that's taken quite a hit. This is the account to which interest earnings of the county's trustees' investments are recorded. Interest earnings are shared at this time with school cafeteria and education debt service funds. Projections for this revenue for the 2021 fiscal year are also down, as well as next year's estimates. Mr. Shanks had warned us about that last year, if y'all remember, but he just said the rates that he was getting had really tanked, and so that's coming to fruition now. Expenditures. Expenditures in this fund are retired debt for the purchase of property for and the construction of the Justice Center Jail, renovation of the courthouse, and the purchase of solid waste equipment. There are now 3 separate bond issues for this debt. Other expenditures include paying agent fees, other debt service charges, and trustees' commission. Paying agent fees and other debt issuance charges are fees paid to banks for administrative services related to our bonds, capital outlay notes, and loans. Interest division. The division of interest earned that is being deposited in the General Debt Service Fund and Education Debt Service Fund has been determined by the amount of fund balance in each of these funds on a June 30th basis. The division of 2021 fiscal year was 22% of the total interest earned for General Debt Service and 78% for Education Debt Service. If no motion is made to do otherwise, the division of interest posted to these funds will be determined in the same manner as the 2021 fiscal year. Projected interest division for 21-22 fiscal year is 19.31% for general debt service fund and 80.69% for education debt service fund. Beneath that there, we have a history of the tax rate over time for this fund. Beneath that, you have the current debt for Justice Center courthouse renovations. And then at the very bottom, you have a total outstanding principal and total interest owed on the debt there. Any questions on general debt service?
How much did a penny bring in last year there?
It was 103 roughly.
That's what I was thinking, 103 last year. And this year you're saying 123?
Yes, sir. Yeah, last year was 103, 928, 83. And so due to the reappraisal, the value of the penny has went up, but then of course the certified tax rate has then decreased subsequently. So that's why less pennies in each fund yield roughly the same tax rate, tax revenue. This, as well as the other two debt service funds, there's really just not much leeway in these. You have to issue what you need necessary to make the county's debt payments for the next fiscal year. So there's just not a lot you can do with these. We may need to consider moving some portion of a penny back. We had moved some of them out to establish that capital projects fund. And now that we did all the bond issues that we did this year, for the next 3 to 4 years, this general debt service fund is a little light. It could use a little help. And the way that works, you know, what you could fix this year for half a penny or a penny, next year would take two and a half pennies to fix it. Kick it down the road another year, it's going to take 3.5, 4 pennies to fix. So when you have a problem like this, it's much cheaper to fix it immediately than it is to push it down. It just continues to get more and more expensive. But assuming no new major projects in the general debt service fund, in about 3 or 4 years, Mr. Gibson has showed us that graph, the payments drop off significantly. So we just have a brief period that we need to bridge the difference right now and kind of support that fund balance just a little bit. But if you look on page 2 of that budget right now, we're using $539,000 projected to balance next year's budget in general debt service. And that's going to be about the same story for the next 3 or 4 years. And so that fund balance is going to start to get pretty low if we don't do something about it. Now there might be some ability to shuffle from capital projects, there might be some ability to shuffle from education debt service, but anytime you move pennies from somewhere else, you know, there's an equal and opposite reaction over there that happens. And so this capital project fund has been a wonderful thing. It's allowed us to take on some projects without affecting our operating budget. So if we take the pennies from there, can't bite off as many projects. They end up falling into your operating budget or end up getting pushed out for years. You take from education debt service, that fund is looking pretty strong right now, but then the time comes that they want to do something else and you'll have to either raise taxes or find pennies to bring back over that direction. Because that fund, although now is in good shape, whenever the schools do need to take on a project, usually they're fairly large. And so it's we have some options, but just want you to be aware that anytime you do any of those, there's another opposite reaction that happens on the other end of it. Moving along to special debt service, which is where we do our highway debt service. The purpose of this fund is retired debt associated with the highway, roads, and bridge improvements or construction and/or large equipment purchases. Revenue. The special debt service fund is funded by 1/3 of certain wheel tax collections. What that is, it's 1/3 of the original $20 wheel tax is what goes into the highway debt service. I know there's a lot of misconception about that when people go to renew their tags and they're, I believe it's at $96 currently, but all the highway department is actually getting from that is 1/3 of the original $20 wheel tax. You have other wheel taxes in there that help with the schools. You have other wheel tax in there that helps with the general fund. And then you also have state fees in there that just get passed along to the state, so 1/3 of the original 20 is what the highway debt service gets out of every wheel tax rate. Bless you. The special debt service fund is, I already read that, sorry. The 1989 gasoline taxes that are received from the state were transferred to special debt service fund for the highway fund, but that ceased in the 2011-12 fiscal year to help with the expenditures in highway fund. The wheel tax collections still appear to be sufficient for retiring the current debt. Expenditures. Highway debt service fund budgets include payment for principal and interest on one refunded bond issued for highway and road improvements and or bridge construction and purchase of equipment. Outstanding debt on June 30, 2021 will be as follows, and below you see the one issue remaining there, and it's principal and interest. Other expenditures include paying agent fees, other debt service charges and trustees commission, paying agent fees and other debt issuance charges or fees paid to the bank for administrative services related to our bonds, capital outlets, and loans. This one is decreasing as well, but the rate at which it's decreasing is much smaller. It's about $123,000 per year, and it looks to be on track to, the fund balance will be small, but it'll satisfy the debt. So I don't think this one's gonna need any attention. We'll keep an eye on it just because the fund balance is small, but its revenue seems to be sufficient to retire the debt.
How much was this, was it, you were on this bond issue? About $2 million for the highway department at that time? Can you remember?
Sure.
Anyway, 1.641 now. Nobody, you don't know what it was used for?
That maybe purchase new trucks. I believe it was to purchase those 6 or 8 dump trucks.
I didn't know, some of the rest may know too, some were new on this bond took place, so I didn't know.
Maybe a couple of tractors, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
All right, moving right along to your next blue section. That's our last debt service notes. It should be your education debt service fund. Education debt service fund, the purpose of this fund is to record retirement of debt that has been issued for schools. Most of the debt is retired from the property tax collections and wheel tax collections allocated to this fund. However, certain debt that is retired from the general purpose school fund is also recorded in this education debt service fund. These payments can be viewed as pass-through postings since the revenue received from the Board of Education equals the amount paid out. Revenue, property tax. The budget for education debt service fund is based on the proposed certified tax rate of 2.1573, of which 24.71 cents is allocated for this fund, using the 93% collection rate at $123,907.81 per penny. Account 44110, investment income. This is the revenue account into which interest earnings on the county trustees' investments are recorded for this fund. Investment earnings are shared with the school cafeteria fund and general debt service fund. These earnings have decreased considerably compared to what was once being earned. Also, interest being earned by the state for the qualified school construction bond allocated for Hawkins County is also being posted here. These interest earnings are noted on the invoices we received from the Tennessee State School Bond Authority. Account 48130, contributions. This account is used to record revenue received from the general purpose school fund to reimburse this fund for scheduled principal, interest, and administrative fee payments on the 2009 and 2010 QSCAB bond issues in the EESI loans. The school transportation bond reimbursed this fund in previous years for school bus purchase debt until such debt was completely paid off. Even though the Board of Education fund retirements of this debt, accounting practices require that these payments are recorded in the Education Debt Service Fund. Account 49800, transfer in. This account is used to record the transfer from general fund for the interest due on the 2010 qualified school construction bond issue. IRS guidelines require that the IRS subsidy that is received semi-annually from this issue be ran through general fund instead of the debt service fund. So what we do is we just have a transfer in and a transfer out, and then it gets over there where we need it. Interest division, the division of interest earned that is being deposited in general debt service fund and education debt service fund has been determined by the amount of fund balance in each of these funds. This is the same note that we just discussed on the general debt service. Again, assuming no motion otherwise, the same logic will be applied, and this year's division will be 19.31 8.31 for general debt service and 80.69 for education debt service fund. Expenditures in this fund are for retiring debt issued from phase 1, 2, and 3 school construction projects and other school improvements funded by the 2009-2010 Q-SCAB bonds, state authority, bond authority, and by the EESI loan program. Outstanding debt on June 30th, 2020 should be as follows, with no school bus purchase debt remaining. They paid off their last school debt, I believe it was a year or two ago, and have had sufficient money to buy school buses as needed, so they're no longer financing those currently. And below you'll see there the list of the debt, outstanding principal, and its interest. And then down there farther past that first total, you'll see the debt retired from the school purpose school fund. So that's the flow through money that we were talking about. GPS is actually paying for that, but it has to flow through our budget, through our education debt service. So there'll be contributions that match the expenditures going out, just pass through money. On the next page, you'll see a historical history there of the pennies in this fund. Of course, you'll see some decreases in there, but when you see a decrease matched with a reappraisal year, it's traditionally not an actual decrease, it's just the equivalent amount of pennies due to the reappraisal to bring in the same amount of revenue, which you very well see this year. We had 29 cents last year. This year we were projecting 24.71. It's not that we took pennies out of the fund, it's that that's what we needed to have the same amount of revenue in there. 2010 qualified school construction bond issue. County Commission passed resolutions in June and August of 2010 for Hawkins County to be part of the 2010 qualified school construction bond issue offered to the Tennessee State School Bond Authority. At the time the resolutions were discussed with the Budget Committee and County Commission, the project was that these bonds would be low interest bonds, and that the Board of Education would fund retirement of this debt, including principal, interest, and/or administrative fees. The bonds were actually issued in such a way that the IRS would pay a subsidy to the entities who were participating, the total amount being the entire interest requirement for this issue until such time as the debt is completely retired. This subsidy is not restricted to debt service, but as the Board of Education is funding retirement of this debt, it is assumed that the subsidy will be used for the interest payments. The Office of State and Local Finance informed participating entities on June 6, 2011, the deposit of this subsidy must be deposited into general fund in order to comply with IRS tax regulations. Therefore, in order for us to meet this compliance, the subsidy has been and will continue to be deposited into general fund, with the equivalent amount being transferred to education debt service fund each time interest is due on the 2010 Q-SCAB issue. The general fund and education debt service fund budgets will continue to reflect this appropriate line item to allow this process. Also, there will continue to be applicable language regarding this issue in the appropriations resolution of the budget document. These procedures have been discussed with the State and Local Finance Office and with the local government audit. Debt management policy, an updated debt management policy was passed by County Commission on April 22nd, 2019 when we did that refunding. However, one of the requirements of the Governor's 3-Star program is that the debt management policy be reviewed annually by the County Mayor and County Commission. So if they're still holding us to that, we might want to get that on the June resolution list so that we can still be in compliance. I don't know if 3-Star is allowing any leeway with the pandemic or if they still want that reviewed annually. But if they, then we need to get that on the June docket so that we can be in compliance with that. I don't feel that our debt policy needs any revisions, but it just needs to go in front of the commission and a formality so that we still qualify, because that 3-Star program allows us to get some better rates, if I'm not mistaken, on some of our.
We get 5%, depending on what level we get 5% off the bonds that we float.
Okay. And so last year, I mean, I haven't had a bond issue for a while, but last year we had 3, so I'm sure that was very advantageous for us.
We also get points as consideration for those bonds.
Okay. So you never know when our next bond issue will come up, and so I think that would be a good practice to probably just stay in that program annually and make sure that we stay compliant. Any questions on any of the debt service funds that we just went over?
Where does the education department stand on replacing their HVAC units that we talked about a year ago?
We'd have to ask them when they come in here. I know that progress is going on that. I know that we are in the process of establishing the 5th EESI loan, and they're doing renovations on that currently. I know we've seen some of that money come across. Matter of fact, you'll notice some of that money show up here in our budget of 171, more pass-through money. I know when they receive their state funding, or excuse me, their federal funding, theirs flowed through the state, and some of the things that they're allowed to do is different than what the county is allowed to do. So it's my understanding that they will not be back in front of us. Of course, please confirm this with the school, but it's my understanding they will not be back in front of us asking for money to finish that HVAC project, that they are gonna be able to take care of it internally with their, I believe they call it ESSER money. I'm not sure what that acronym stands for.
Do we know if their enrollment rate is up or down, or?
No, we can look into that if you would like, see what their ADAs are. I'm sure this is a very interesting year for them. I'm not sure how the online enrollment factors into their ADAs, but we can review that if the commission wants to look at that. We outsource that to CTAS, and they send us back their findings. Hearing no additional questions on that one, if you want to flip to the last tab there, which is our capital projects fund. I don't have any formal notes typed up on that, but if you just want to glance over that there, I think this has been a tremendous thing that we've established here, having this. Like I said earlier, it allows us to take a lot of these one-off projects, these one-time large expenditures, and keep it out of our general operating budget, which is, in my opinion, the only way we should do that. Shows a much more realistic operating budget when you don't have these capital projects in there. And by squirreling away a few cents in there, we've been able to handle quite a few things that have been thrown at us. We were able to purchase back a couple of years ago several police vehicles out of this fund. We were able to handle that jail grinder project out of this fund, able to handle the extent of that radio project, whatever the CBDG emergent grant doesn't cover, has been able to handle out of this fund. And I think it's just been a tremendous thing that we've been able to have this, and I think we need to be committed to keeping it. I know that because of the other debt service funds and the shape of the general fund, there might be some temptation to pull some pennies from here, but once you start pulling pennies from here, I think it's going to be hard to get them back in here. Anybody have any questions on general capital projects fund? If not, then that concludes my budget review, unless there's any other general questions or conversations that you want to have. Currently about 9:30, we don't have our first break scheduled till 10. I'm open to whatever the committee wants to do, if you want to take that break early, or if you want to start into some of the budgets that I present. Up to you all.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Have you calculated the grand total revenue? You know what I'm talking about for the.
All funds combined,
Yeah,
we keep them separated and isolated for the sake of the expenditures that are hitting against them.
yeah. So in the $11 million that we got from we might get from the feds.
I appreciate that verbiage.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this. There is a provision for replacing global revenue. So there's a calculation where you take the grand total of all revenues from all sources, and if that doesn't go, there's a couple of formulas that they offer. But one of them, the simplest one, is if that grand total of all revenue for last year, which is under their guidelines, the pandemic year, if that has not gone up by 4.1%, we get whatever the deficiency is, that's eligible for that 11 million. What we've talked about is it's going to be difficult. We're going to have to be creative in how we structure our requests for that money. But if we don't use it, we lose it. So if we can't come up with $11 million that meets their criteria, money goes like Cinderella's turns into a pumpkin again. It's gone. The cool thing about that revenue deficiency is that we can use that for any purpose at all. So mostly 11 million is for this or for that, or broadband or sewer or water, et cetera, et cetera. If we have a general revenue deficiency less than 4.1% over our trend, we can do anything with that money. So that's why it's important we need to make that calculation.
What Mr. Boyd was speaking on there is the revenue replacement segment of it. If you can qualify, as he stated, then all of these restrictions go away, but only to the amount that is equivalent of the revenue replacement. And so if not, then you fall back into jumping through the hoops and making sure that they grant us approval. I have not heard any update on that pre-approval process. When they originally talked about revenue replacement, I was hoping it was going to be an isolated issue. And so, for example, we could take a revenue like that state board bill and show them that not only has it not had growth, but it has had massive decline. But through my last update, through the University Comptroller's Office or through local audit, but they stated that it's all or nothing. And so you can't take an individual, you can't cherry pick a revenue and say this one's performing poorly and call that revenue replacement. But I do not know if the breakdown will be all revenues in their entirety, all local revenues by fund. And so there will be quite a process to establish. And again, we still need pre-approval on these processes, because the last thing we want to do is balance the budget on Fed money to find out it's not coming and it's not going to be eligible. So I think that is a great thing for us to explore, a great avenue for us to try to free up some funds that we can just balance budgets with. But I think we probably need to proceed as if it's not going to happen, and then just be very happy if it does. But I think we probably need to handle this budget and get it in line to where we're comfortable with it without banking on the Fed money. And then if the Fed money clears up, it's icing on the cake. But I'm fearful, and they very well may change these restrictions. I mean, they've done that in the past. Counties have complained back when they issued the CARES money and said, you've dangled this carrot out in front of us, but we can't ever actually reach it. And so they changed the rules, and we were able to get it. We were able to get it in our budget, and it helped us this year. Last year, we projected this budget to be $800,000 in the red, and we're going to finish this year probably $1 million to the good, which is outstanding. And $847,000 of that is CARES money that originally we didn't think we were going to be able to get. So they very well could do that to us again. I just don't want to bank on it. So I think we need to handle this budget and make sure that we have something that we're comfortable with, and then we need to fully pursue that, but two separate ventures. We need to handle the budget because we know what the timeline is on it. You know, we have to pass this thing by August 31st, and that Fed money, we have a couple of different dates, but about 4 years to obligate it, and then even a little bit longer to spend it. So I'm not saying that we don't need to go that route. We absolutely do. We need to try to get every penny of it we can, but I think this is its own animal, and this takes precedent first.
Just in case everybody don't know, that's Woody Boyd and Chairman Randy Patterson. They're part of the ad hoc committee, so, and I appreciate you guys coming today, so. We can go on into the.
Start with some of the budgets that we present. All right, everybody has,
You have another one of these?
I have one more. Just one.
Are those books the same?
They are. Would you like to have one?
Yeah, can we both have them?
You may. These are my loaners. Yeah, that's true. There you go. All right, on your schedule, if you will flip to that last page, and it has departments other than office holders general fund. And I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So I'm going to go to litter and trash collection, which is account number 64,000 on page 37.
What was that over there, Chief?
It is on page 37. Litter and trash collection, 64,000 is the account number or the function number for you. Give everybody a minute to get there. And on that page, it's the bottom half of the page there, you'll see the budget is relatively unchanged.
It's on the,
Oh, sorry.
first part of the, I think you're in the first part, it's page 37.
No, I didn't get over for that. So it's at 34.
It's 37.
Okay, so that budget is relatively unchanged. The only changes that you will see, and those changes, if you look at that last column, it really highlights the changes. You'll see the appropriate step raise for the individual who's in that budget, and then the salary-related line items that have to adjust with that. And then the only other change that you will see is with the medical insurance. So net change there on that budget of $2,217. Anybody have any questions on that budget for me?
Well, until all we have any control over is what tax dollars we got to earn. The, Social Security, state retirement, life insurance, we have no control over that anyway.
I mean, once you set the salary, those lines are what they are. That's correct. And keep in mind, there is a grant that helps fund the litter program. So the majority of these expenditures are grant covered.
I have a question. Can I ask another question? What, price per gallon did you budget the gasoline cost for? And do we have any provision if that's not correct? Gas is costing more is what I'm getting at.
We've looked at the historical trend of gasoline, and a lot of times if you look in the actual column there of the 1920 year, that gas only ran 3,000. So we didn't see any need to panic on that particular gas line. Now some you will see an increase. The sheriff's department has an increase in theirs, but each individual office holder submits their own budgets, so there's not a one-size-fits-all gas rate that's been implemented for everybody.
Any questions?
All right, hearing none, I'm gonna knock off that we've looked at litter. Next one is there on the same page, just looking up there at the top, it's miscellaneous. Only two changes on this one. Other supplies and materials ran a little over, so increased that there slightly. And then due to our revenues performing well, our trustees commission looks like it will run over. So we've increased that 15,000 next year to hopefully avoid that happening again. Net change in that budget being 15,250.
Anybody got anything on that?
All right, moving right along, employee benefits is on page 35. $58600 is your account number. It's that small budget there at the bottom of the page. It is completely unchanged. That's the same exact budget as last year. And again, earlier when I was reading the notes, that is the medical insurance line where our retirees expense hits. And that's also where we stash that reserve for qualifying circumstances and open enrollment. So we have somewhere to go when policies change, because insurance is always a moving target. It appeared to be budgeted significantly for last year, and so we anticipated this year to be the same, so that budget's the exact same as it was last year. Questions on that one? Okay, I'm gonna skip the next one. Ms. Davis will be presenting the airport. So if we go up to tourism on page 33.
Right before we go there, on this, at the top, page 35, on veteran service, what will the actual pay of the veteran service officer versus the secretary be this fiscal year?
If you will look on your column that is titled estimated 2021, 2022, your supervisor is line 105 in that column, which would be 33,071. And the secretary is right below that, line 161. And if you follow that over, it is 31,922.
I was looking at last year's there, okay.
Well, now last year's is going to look a little funny because he didn't start till very late in the year. And of course, you know, she was making the predecessor's pay until that position was filled. So last year's looks a little odd, but there will be a budget amendment that you guys will get in June. Now that the dust is settled on that and that position has no longer been vacant, that will clean up that account. So you guys should be looking for that in your June packet. But as far as next year, it's that next column over. And we'll go over that again in more detail when he presents his budget. Let's see, so we were going to tourism on page 33. And there is a typo in that line in the estimated 2021 column. Everybody please strike 10 off of that. This year just got projected to finish even better. That should be 1,500, not 15,000.
For the estimated 2020, 21.
Correct. The third column over. And so that budget is unchanged at 1,500 again. And it's just a one-line budget there. Next one, we're going
Before we go on, tourism is one of the uses of the $11 million. We can use money to increase or actually replace lost revenue from our tourism venue. So it'd be like Hale Springs and stuff like that. So I guess we'll handle that outside this budget, but just so everybody knows, that is an allowable use of that money.
Again, stormwater will be presented by Ms. Davis. Parks will be presented by Ms. Davis. So the next one we have here would be county coroner on page 27.
Let me ask a question of what he just said. Mr. Harrell, when this committee prepared a budget for spending that COVID money, does that come back to the commission for our vote?
Yes, sir.
Then it come back to the budget committee, then on to the commission.
That's what I assumed. I just wanted to be sure.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
It's a recommending body to a recommending body to the full commission.
Exactly.
Right.
Hey, did you say we're going there?
27. And at the top of that page there, you'll see the county coroner medical examiner budget. The other per diem and fees, the fees that go out for the actual medical investigators. Looks like it's running a little close, and so I've increased that $1,000 for next year. Again, this also has that next line in there that you see, which is 309. I have that at the same amount, but whenever we get that actual contract, that may have to change depending on what the ETSU Forensics is charging for their year's worth of services there. But currently, we have it shown with a $1,000 increase.
Anybody got any questions?
Okay.
Eric,
Nope. Yes.
just out of curiosity, with, seems like there's a lot of, I'm noticing a lot of homeless people in the town of Rogersville. Do you think that this, medical examiner fees and usage may increase due to homeless people being here in the county?
It would be hard for me to speculate on that. I suppose it would be a possibility, but I don't work really in that field and don't really know what to expect from that.
Generally, they go to the medical examiner's office when it's, a death that's cannot be explained and it's under a certain age, so there's, I don't, you know, and again, that's maybe if they did not die in a hospital as well, so that, that's generally when we send to the medical examiner's office.
Based off of that, unless it increased significantly in our
Yeah, I
homeless
can't see it.
population, I don't see it having significant effect. But take that with a grain of salt.
The one thing that does tend to affect this more than anything is drugs. As, you know, as there are more and more overdoses at home, those will go on to the ME's office to verify drug use. I think that would affect it more than homelessness.
Preservation of records, again, will be between myself or Ms. Davis, most likely, and I'll give that one to her. Other general admin, 51,900 on page 12. Couple increases. The policy we have on the library and Kenner building looks like it was running very, very close to what we have budgeted, so a slight increase there. Also, our main liability insurance coverage line finished decent, but if you look at from the 19-20 year to where we're projecting to finish this year, it's a pretty substantial increase. So I tried to do a modest increase there just to stay ahead of the flow of insurance, and insurance unfortunately only tends to go one direction. However, I did feel like our workers' compensation insurance was significantly over budgeted there, so a slight reduction. However, that's not a line we really have any control over, so whatever they come back after the audit and show our rates, I mean, we'll have to adjust accordingly, but wanted to try to squeeze a little money out of that line to compensate for the increase on the liability side. Rest of that budget is on change. I was hoping to be able to reduce line 348, the rollout of the commissioner iPads, of course, was a little longer than anybody had anticipated. So I'm not seeing the benefit yet there to do that comfortably, but maybe in the next year we'll have the reduced cost, of course, but with rising cost of postage, I mean, it may just be a wash, but I am watching for that one, but haven't seen it yet, so it unfortunately is carried over at the same rate as it was last year. Mhm.
recording system for committee meetings. Is
Mhm.
that here, or is that at the,
That was for here. That was for this office, this building.
so we're gonna change it, or,
If you want to,
well, I mean. you
there
got
is
extra-
a line there established for the potential replacement of things. Now, when we first established, the new system with the mics and the hand mics and the new equipment, I believe it was about a $17,000 expenditure. And we left just a reduced amount in there to handle replacement costs of, periodic mic replacements as they would come up. It hasn't been that bad yet. Everything has held up pretty well, but at some point, some of these will start to fail. And so that's just a line, so we have a place if need be to replace those as they come up. But there's no plans on doing a massive overhaul. It's just a replacement as things age.
Anybody got anything here?
I have one question, I guess. Ms. Barber can help more than anybody, I guess. The Kenner building, the Kenner house, it's not being used at all, is it?
No,
It's not being used.
it's not, it would have
It's
to
really
have,
not safe, is
it
it?
would have to have extensive remodeling to be safe to be used. They
I know.
put a new roof on and they did the stabilization of the building, but there's still on the, there's still a lot of work that would have to be done before it would be able to be used.
Well, the reason I asked that was, the capital outlay projects that we've got, money that we've got for county buildings and so forth. But I know I was chairman of the building committee there for a while. And that's been 12 years ago. We looked at it and, there was cracks between the floor and the foundation or the walls, 2 or 3 inches wide then. And we got under the floor, crawled through partial basement, everything else, looked at it. But I knew it was in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, when I actually, for that part of it, there was, they went in and put, and I can't think of what those are, the crossbars that stabilize the building. If you go up there and look at it, you can see those on each one of the sides. There's still, I think, a bulge on the left side of it, but it is stable. They pulled that back in as much as they could. But, it's kind of like St. Mark's Church up there. There's just so much you can do without actually jeopardizing the building.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's, I guess a decision needs to be made, what's gonna happen to it. The city and the county, are in partnership with it, with the ownership actually being to the county. And, there's a lot of grants out there right now that might be available to do some work to it, if they want to apply for it. I know there's several, just rolled out day before yesterday, a state historic preservation grant that might be something that you can look at to do that.
I don't know about the availability of them, but I would highly encourage us to use grant funding if at all possible and stay out of capital projects for that particular project. As I'm sure Ms. Davis will tell you guys later, or probably the Public Buildings Committee already knows, the roof on the Justice Center will have to be looked at some point in the future. And that could very well drain our entire capital projects fund. So although it's a great place to put these one-off projects, until we know the damage and the cost of the potential replacement of that roof, I'd be leery to use or tie up much of that funding.
Anybody got anything here?
A couple years ago, the people with the library asked me, they said, we need to repair the Kenner building or make a decision to tear it down. Because at that time, they needed extra parking. I like history and I'd like to see it restored, but it's rapidly getting to the point where it's gonna be dangerous to sit there. Children.
It's a county building, so that would be up to
Yeah.
the county to make that decision. If
It's
it's a
a
contributing
historical
building,
building, that's.
yeah, it is a contributing, it is on the National Historic Register, it is a contributing building to the historic district, so. And the grant that just rolled out yesterday, all those qualifications are on that grant.
Making anything else?
Okay. County buildings will be by Ms. Davis. I think we could probably get in the planning budget right before our break, probably about sufficient. It's on page 10. And that budget is the same as last year, except for that contractor government agency line, which is where we talked about earlier today, that First Tennessee Development District increase. And like I said, they haven't had an increase for a while, so it was about due, I suppose. It's $1,410 increase there, so that's the only change you'll see in that budget.
You making anything on planning? If not, we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break. When we come back, we'll see Mr. Shanks. So we'll take 10 minutes.
So we back at 12?
Yeah, you come back at 12.
Go outside and-
I won't say.
Morning, guys.